You fought in the Clone Wars?
Yes. I was once a Jedi Knight, the same as your father. For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic. Before the Dark Times.
Protocol 66 must not be discovered by the Jedi.
Yes, Lord Tyrannus.
You must face the gravest of journeys to Moribond, the ancient homeworld of the Sith.
You're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
Ah, very good.
Welcome to A Cup of the Clone Wars. Here are your hosts, Dan Cisa and Corey Clubb.
This is Laird Malamed of the Indy Cast, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z and Corey Clubb. This is the podcast you're looking for.
Hi, this is Chris from the Star Wars Kidscast, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z and Corey Clubb. This is the podcast you're looking for.
Welcome to A Cup of Clone Wars, where Coffee with Kenobi examines Star Wars The Clone Wars through a critical lens. On today's show, we will be discussing parts 1 and 2 of the Disappeared from Season 6, featuring Jar Jar Binks and Mace Windu. We have two esteemed guests joining us for A Cup of Clone Wars, Laird Malamed and Chris Hamilton. IndyCast listeners will recognize Laird from his great work on the IndyCast, as well as his work on the Young Indiana Jones television series. He also examines the music of both the Indiana Jones series with the Magic of John Williams specials and on Bondcast with Jimmy Mack of Rebel Force Radio. Star Wars podcasting fans will certainly recognize Chris Hamilton from his awesome podcast, Star Wars Kidscast. Chris's show is geared towards children who love Star Wars and invites parents in on the fun as well. Chris also recently had a story published in Star Wars Magazine #2, with the humorous traveling on Tatooine, which was fantastic. We are happy to have a cup of coffee with Laird and Chris and to discuss this unique arc. Welcome, Laird and Chris.
Hey, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Well, it's our pleasure. You guys are two podcasting legends and friends of our show. And when I saw this one and I saw all the amazing references to our favorite archaeologist and, of course, having Jar Jar, and you two came to mind right away because you just have a great background and a passion for Star Wars and these characters. So this is a natural fit for us. So let's just jump right into it. And Laird, we'll just toss it your way first. What is your overall opinion on this arc?
Well, I've watched it now. I watched it when it first came out. I binged not as much as some over the first weekend. It took me a couple weekends to get through all 13 episodes. And my first impression, I've been a roller coaster with these episodes. My first impression was sort of, okay. And then I watched them again and I'm like, hey, I really like these. This really is like redeeming Mace Windu for me. Some other people have said that. I've always sort of softened on Jar Jar from all of the sort of bad vibes that he left with people. And I have, sort of my own theories about Jar Jar that I need to write up at some point. We'll talk about it today. Mm-hmm. And then interestingly, preparing for the show and watching it again over the weekend, I kind of went back to a little bit like, yeah, it's good, but it doesn't have for me, it didn't have the lasting impact of the Yoda arc, which I know you guys will talk about on your next Cup of Clone Wars, or this Order 66 arc. So, but overall, I certainly enjoyed it, particularly probably from the second half of the first episode forward.
What about you, Chris? What were your overall opinions on this arc?
Well, when you first asked me, and I'm so glad I won the contest to be on Coffee with Kenobi. That's so cool. That's awesome. When you first asked me to be on, my first thought was, awesome, I get to talk to about the Order 66 arc. I get to talk about the Yoda arc. But no, you bring the kids guy in to talk about Jar Jar. So, yeah, I get it. I pigeonholed myself, but that's all right.
But actually, not exactly. I mean, and you and I had talked before, and you said you would love to talk about some non-kid stuff. And I think that some stuff with Jar Jar and Mace especially and the nature of the Force that really are natural for you because there's a spirituality to it, and you're a strong spiritual man yourself. So it really is going to be interesting to hear what you think.
Yeah, well, somewhat strong spiritual. My daughter just climbed on me. I'm kind of in the same boat as Laird on this one. It's there's definitely elements of it I really appreciated, and certainly as a lifelong Indiana Jones fan myself, it was fun to see all the. There's a real blurred line between satire and homage going on here.
Yeah.
And outright just use the scene from the movie. But yeah, I enjoyed it. It wasn't my favorite of the new batch, but it was fun to see these 2 episodes.
Corey, what about you?
Yeah, I agree with you guys. It wasn't my favorite arc thus far. And it really played up, obviously, in 2 different angles. You know, Mace Windu is so serious, and Jar Jar Binks is like complete opposite. So it's like, let's put these 2 buddy cops together and see what they do. So it was a fun to watch, and my kids really enjoyed it because of the funniness and a lot of action, a lot of adventure, and mystery involved with it. But personally, I think it was one of the weaker ones of the series.
Wow, I'm going to be the main champion of this arc. Interesting. Here's sort of how I grab me. It certainly does not have the gravitas of the other arcs that we discussed in the Yoda arc as well. But I think there's some really insightful things going on with the nature of the Force, with the nature of friendship and relationships, and really the nature of the Jedi in particular. Mace Windu, I think both Mace and Jar Jar, just the teaming up of Jar Jar and Mace together, we've got basically 2 polarizing figures in Star Wars lore, where there are definitely very strong opinions on both sides of the fence for both of these characters. The fight scenes in this are fantastic, and Mace does an incredible, amazing Spider-Man impression, especially in the 2nd episode. Which
Mace is doing parkour in there.
Yes, he is. Yeah, he's like kind of leading
or
towards
Jackie
episode
Chan
7.
or something.
You bet he is. So I'm interested in kind of what do we learn about both Jar Jar and Mace through these arcs. And Corey, let's just start with you.
Sure. Yeah, like I mentioned before, they're both 2 different ends of the spectrum for me. And we learned a lot, I think. And like you said, Dan, you brought a good point about friendship and just learning to get to know one another. And these characters haven't really been involved with each other a whole lot through the series or the movies at all. And I feel like in kind of that first scene as they're driving or flying to the planet there, they seem to kind of introduce each other to each other again and get to know each other a little bit. And we see a lot of eye rolling from Mace Windu, and Jar Jar, of course, is doing his thing. But I found it interesting that Jar Jar was he really had a good connection with some of the Queen and different characters and things like that. And
I'll say,
yeah, it was really interesting. Yeah, a lot of innuendos there, of course, just for fun, I think. But yeah, it was like you said, Chris. It was Jar Jar is a fun character, and it's nice to be able to see him kind of be prominent in this 2-parter here. And I enjoyed it as them pairing up as kind of the buddy cop, like I said.
Well, they even say on StarWars.com under the trivia for this episode or the 2nd one, they say that a lot of this was modeled after one of Samuel Jackson's movies where he teamed up with Eugene Levy of all people.
Oh yeah.
So that was some of the things there, and I thought it was a little interesting and a little bit almost appalling the way Mace was very dismissive, outwardly so, very non-Jedi-like in my opinion. Not quite xenophobic, but really very aggressive, very dismissive of him, and of course his tolerance changes, and that's probably he's like a mirror of the older generations of Star Wars fans, most likely.
Yeah, and this is before Jar Jar had condemned the galaxy to rule under the Empire.
That's right. That's right.
I think that you're right on there about seeing Mace's arc with respecting Jar Jar. I mean, that's my favorite part of the episode, and that they do grow in that relationship. And in fact, in going back and watching episode 1 again and the prequels, one of the things that's sort of like in my kind of like Jar Jar exploration, like, everyone's sort of dismissive to him. It's not, and I think one of the reasons why he got a lot of fan hate wasn't just because he was goofy or he was the fool. I think we've all read Paul McDonald's book or you talked about the show, and he's the fool. meets him, after Qui-Gon saved him. He's like, "What's this?" And it's like, well, like if we're the audience and we obviously are going to relate to Obi-Wan because we know he's a hero. So if Obi-Wan's like, "What's this?" We're going to be like, "Yeah, what's that?" And we see that happen with Mace here. And then by the end of the episode, Mace is then saying to us what we should be thinking, which is, I think he's got one sentence at the end of the first episode, which is, Jar Jar, either it's this place or you're starting to make a lot of sense.
Yeah, that line really stood out to me too. Yeah. And what do you think what can we make of that, Chris? What is he trying to say there? Is this showing him more open-minded, or is he still being very discriminatory?
I think the word you had earlier, intolerant, was the thing. He's kind of impatient with him. He doesn't have time for this guy. It's kind of funny. Like I still can't figure out how Jar Jar ever met Queen Julia and how they ever developed a relationship. She's part of a neutral system, so she wouldn't even be hanging out on Coruscant all that much, I would think.
Or Naboo, probably.
Yeah. Yet Mace Windu barely knows Jar Jar. And they've certainly had more reasons to be in the same place at the same time. But it's kind of neat that this is kind of the Mace Windu from the Phantom Menace, and this is how he treated Anakin. This is the same dismissive, I don't have patience or time for this nonsense. And there is a lot of that going on. You're exactly right. That's how Obi-Wan treated Jar Jar right from the get-go.
Mm-hmm. And you also see, I think this is the most that Mace Windu seems like Samuel L. Jackson in the series. Just his demeanor and his dismissive, aggressive nature. I'm particularly interested, especially episode 1, and just the way that he tries to sneak into Queen Julia's chambers when Jar Jar's in there, and he knows the Jedi mind trick won't work on the guards, but he still tries it anyway, and he's deceptive to them. And I don't know if that's particularly the Jedi way, although I guess you could argue that some of that happens with the Gungans at the beginning of episode 1, but not as overtly. You start to kind of see why Mace has such a strange pull on fans. Laird, how has Mace always been for you, and what do we learn about him through this arc?
Well, I was sort of come solidly on the disliking Mace because of the way he treated Anakin. And so it's hard, right? Because Samuel L. Jackson, I love Samuel L. Jackson. Who doesn't love Samuel L. Jackson?
Right.
And then I also felt that he was never actually utilized all that well in the prequels. Yeah. As compared to, I think it's in the first season of Clone Wars, there was an episode where he's like leading the tanks or something like that. I can't remember what it is. And it's like after that episode, I'm like, oh, that guy's a bad dude in a good way.
Yeah, he's a bad you-know-what, according to his wallet from Pulp Fiction.
Exactly. That's what I was referring to. But keep me clean for the show.
Thank you.
But and so this was, an eye-opener for me in terms of that he could grow, that he could listen to Jar Jar. He doesn't say, I was mistaken to go in, but he feels responsible for Julia disappearing, or at least I got that sense, and he's ready to go, explore underneath. And then he's very loyal to Jar Jar. I mean, maybe him, but he's putting himself at risk to save Jar Jar in the battle that happens underneath, which is another great fight scene.
Oh, it's one of the better. Anytime they let Mace cut loose, and this all goes all the way back to the original series before Dave Filoni got involved with Clone Wars, Tartakovsky series. But Mace Windu kicks all kinds of booty, and it's amazing to watch. And when he does things like that, it makes me wonder why people don't like him. And I think a lot of things that you both mentioned are reasons why. And Corey, what about you? How do you feel about Mace?
Yeah, you guys mentioned he kicks some butt, and I noticed a lot. He doesn't use lightsaber a whole lot. Excuse me. And so
he loves using his hands.
His hands, and I noticed in underneath the temple scene there, he doesn't bring out his lightsaber right away, which I kind of expect him to do. And I wonder if he was holding back a little bit, and he didn't want to show his true colors and show him that he was a Jedi. He's obviously dressed like one, but he knows something dark is going on. And I wondered, in my mind, I kind of thought, well, is he just kind of waiting to, bring out that card up his sleeve to, and he does eventually. But like you said, he does save Jar Jar a lot with the Force, and seems to really have a care for him as far as that fight scene. And of course, I mean, the voiceover work is good, and all during the fight scenes, the music was really drummed up. I really like that a lot.
It was it was tremendous. Well, we have two guys on here who are experts at music anyway. What did you guys think of the music?
I was really blown away by some of the music. It was kind of cool because it's all very Middle Eastern sounding.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden in that fight scene in the second episode where they're fighting giant robots there, those big ones that Jar Jar keeps accidentally bringing them to life.
Mm-hmm. Like
the
Short
music
Round.
Is such, yeah, exactly.
Like Short Round, yeah.
Yeah.
Not my fault.
It's suddenly Irish bagpipes in the middle of that fight scene. They're called the Uilleann pipes. They're and I was like, "Whoa, that's a neat sound to suddenly hear in there."
Yeah,
There's a lot of neat things going on.
It was kind of an eclectic mix. I was sort of okay on the music. I thought like it were good pieces, but I didn't feel that they were super synchronized to the action in a typical kind of John Williams sort of thematic point of view. And I thought it was the first time I watched the episode, I was like, God, it's so weird that the desert trek sequence has no music. But then on the second and third viewings, I actually was appreciative that it wasn't there because the point was to be an inward focus, and then having the music externally would have sort of made it feel more fantastical. And that was supposed to be sort of the realistic sequence in Jar Jar trying to learn how to be calm, and Mace, really trying to help him.
Right. I agree with that. The only thing I want to say about Jar Jar, because Jar Jar has always been someone that has never bothered me. I've been amused by him. And the beginning scene when Jar Jar walks in and they bang those gongs and he jumps, my 12-year-old laughed like I laugh at the Three Stooges. He's just got still, and he just has that appeal that people of younger generations, they respond to him. And I found this to be a brave combination of the two because it was a risk, but I think it paid off well. Another great character, of course, is Yoda. Yoda doesn't have a lot going on in this series, or not this series, but in these two episodes. But he does have an interesting quote about the Force and the Bardotans. He says that intuition, knowledge, the harmony of the universe is what they sense. Passively, they connect with the Force. I think we learn a lot about the Force here, particularly with how they take the Force within us, stealing a life essence. What's going on with the Force, and what do we learn about the Force through this? Let's start with Chris on this one.
I thought it was cool, like that they really remind us through this weird cult. I keep wanting to call them the thuggy cult. I might as well.
Yes.
That everybody's got the Force in them to some degree. That the Force is, and that's certainly an ongoing theme with Star Wars, but it's not something that's mentioned too much in the Clone Wars. That it resides within all of us, binds us together, and all that. And that was something that, like, even they were trying to get the Force out of Jar Jar, and which reminded me of the chapter in the Star Wars Heresies about Jar Jar, and that this whole concept of, like, maybe in some weird way Jar Jar's got a attunement with the Force that we don't understand. He's certainly not a trained Jedi by any stretch of the imagination, but maybe there's something going on there, because his life seems to be all about serendipitous stumbling into the right way.
Oh, yes.
Until he meets Palpatine.
That's right. Very, very good. I'm glad that you brought up Paul's book too. And the cult, I had to look it up. It's the Frangal cult. Called Frangawl, Frangal clan. They're the ones here. Laird, what did you learn about the Force, and what do you think George Lucas is trying to tell us about the Force through this arc?
I think that it was interesting that when you do rip the Force out of somebody, they die. So that it is, sort of it's not a soul. It wasn't kind of going down that spiritual path, but that, one, it was interesting that you could actually do this. And then when it ties into, the ultimate villain in this episode, but two, that there was this, without the Force, you are nothing. And I think that does play right into the themes of the trilogies in terms of how important it is, as Chris just mentioned. I also think it was kind of a vehicle to explain it. You couldn't do it. You had to make it very literal. You had to see it come out. It had to be this greenish thing. It had to be in a ball, and then it's actually funny for Jar Jar kind of describes it. and he's doing in the right. Was he got the radio on at that point?
Mm-hmm.
And then Mace is like, so they're stealing the life essence and putting it in a containment vessel. That was like, he had to make it more serious. And and Mace isn't that surprised about that. I mean, Mace's kind of Jedi thing, kind of from the EU. So I guess we can call this, not necessarily canon, from Shatterpoint, is that he can sense sort of where the Force kind of intersects with other things.
Mm-hmm.
And so it felt appropriate that Mace would be able to sort of sense this sort of energy of, that this Force could be tangible. And that was really what the thing that I took away from finally was that even if it is a sort of spiritual piece, there's a tangible element to it. You can actually see it under some circumstances.
Right. It's ties into the idea of the living Force, which we see much more of in the Yoda arc at the end of this season, and how it's a living Force and it's physically in tune with the spiritual side and the physical aspects. Because when they first introduced this notion of ripping out the Force, then they talk about the life essence, and I thought, are they juxtaposing the Force and your life energy? Are they saying they're separate things, or are they intertwining these two words to mean the exact same thing? Because that's been something that I've struggled with over the years, is this melding of taking the spiritual aspects of the Force and then making them physical. But the midichlorians are helping to kind of make more sense in the larger scope of how this story is being intertwined through us. But I still think, Corey, that it's kind of interesting that they're able to take a spiritual aspect out of you physically. So is that even spiritual? It's biochemical.
Yeah, it's interesting to say the least, and a number of things kind of came to mind for me was, I mean, I always kind of see Mace Windu as the number 2 guy as far as being strongest in the Force as far as the Jedi Council goes. It just seems like to me he's the number 2 guy, and for him to kind of experience this and like you said, he was like kind of like, oh, so that's how they're doing it, or I kind of expected that, or it seems like he kind of I don't know, he's kind of just like, oh, this is not news.
He certainly doesn't seem horrified by the concept, does he?
No, I was interested by that.
And it also shows that Filoni has said, look, I'm going to take things from the EU or from the legends and put them into my story. So that backs up what Laird was talking about too. But I'm still sort of debating this notion of being able to take something spiritual out of you.
Yeah, I don't know if that was kind of like letting the viewer make their own representation of how they want to see what the Force is. What this is supposed to be for them. Is it literally ripping something from them, and then, like you said, it's killing them? So it's a living thing. That's, if something is taken from you, I mean, it's very fascinating to me, and it's almost like they're pulling the Force ghost out of you.
Well, I think metaphorically too, like literally, they're taking away their choice, and they're taking away their spirit, and kind of sucking out their soul. Not literally sucking out their soul, but taking away their way of life, taking them away from their family and friends, and taking away their choice. And the Force works in unison with the nature of the world anyway, so I can see where it works in that direction. What do you think, guys?
I've got a question for you. Have you heard anything about the genesis of this episode? Did it start with, we're going to do an homage to Raiders and Indy and all that, or did it start with, we're going to say something about the Force, and then this story kind of evolved into, and then we can do this and that because this is turning into a Temple of Doom kind of thing?
Right.
Because I wonder if it started as an homage to Indiana Jones, then great, and then they found, okay, well, we're not going to have them rip out a live heart from a guy in the Temple of Doom, so what can we do? Okay, that's cool, we can do it about the Force. But if it started the other way around, that they wanted to say something about the Force, then you're getting into some weird unanswered questions, or this raises more questions than it answers.
Especially when you throw Mother Talzin in too.
Well, I don't know the answer to that question, Chris. I was wondering that, and I was hoping to reach out, but didn't able to reach anybody to get that answer. But I do know that I did read, I think, and people correct me if I've just kind of made this up, that originally they were going to have Count Dooku be at the end, and they switched it to Mother Talzin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that I think we have to ask ourselves the question, and I'll posit an answer, which will get back to your question. as also to why did these 2 episodes versus some of the other ones we've heard a little bit about get finished versus finishing 2 other episodes. And I have to think that answer does come back to, yes, they are trying to say something about the Force, and that the sort of nature of some of the mysteries of George Lucas's Star Wars are areas he wanted to explore in these last 13 episodes, be it Order 66 or some of the political stuff that's in the Clovis arc, and then ultimately, obviously, with Yoda's journey. And so I think that they, regardless of how it started, they kept this because there's Force information for us here.
Yeah, and I believe I had read that George Lucas had said he wanted to do something with nods to Indiana Jones. And like you said, that what was it you said at the beginning, Chris? There's a fine line between parody and homage. And then when I saw at the end, did you all see who wrote these episodes?
Yeah, J.W. Rizzler.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when you see that, then all the dots just kind of connect.
Yeah, he's a huge Indy fan. He's and I'm a huge Star Wars fan too. I've been reading his making of books. I just got to Jedi, so
oh man,
they're great,
really great. I wish he had spent one book on each of the Indy movies instead of putting them all together.
Yeah. But
yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I mean, in terms of the references, and maybe go back to that. I mean, it is this weird mix, right? Because you're like trying to like concentrate on the Force, these Barnatans, we've never heard of them before, and as you said, like how does Jar Jar know Julia? And then at the same time, you're like, is that room supposed to be like from Crystal Skull? Is that the
oh yeah.
Is that, I'm like trying to pick up all the references,
Let's just do that now. I had that down on my list a little bit further, but let's talk about all the Indiana Jones nods. How many do you think we could name? Let's get them all
20,
out there.
30.
Yeah, well, Laird, why don't we start with you? What are some of the ones that you noticed?
Well, there's, as I was alluding to there, as I felt that the council room on Bardata felt like it was from Crystal Skull. And obviously we have the Temple of Doom homage underneath the on Pancot Palace, both from the lava and ripping out the Force essence, the cages. Although I also felt with all those cages up there, I was looking at Time Bandits. That jumps out to me. And then at the, obviously the stuff with the light coming through the lenses, although I feel like that's less Raiders and more like a lot of that's existed in serials for a long time.
Very serials.
There's a little James Bondy too.
Yeah, definitely.
Like the laser's going to come and get him.
Yeah, and there's Lawrence of Arabia is going on there with the camel or whatever those are, the camel-like creatures. I don't know. There's just some of them. It's and I guess being in the Tibetan settings. For me personally, this is totally not a reference, but it's one I made up. But I was wondering if they used some of the torch sound effects we recorded for Young Indy when they're coming into the cavern the first time. There's some scenes there that are very much like the Egypt episode of Young Indy. Oh, and I have to ask my buddy Matt Wood. I'm like, did you go back to our torch sound effects we made? So probably not, but one likes to think that those are still useful 25 years later.
That's pretty cool. And I don't know if any of you looked on the trivia for this episode, but it says it's not explicitly said in the dialogue, but the cult leader of the Frangal, Senescal Patine, he's supposed to echo Chatterlal from Pancot Palace.
Yeah, he does sound a little bit like that. What are some of the other ones you guys saw?
Well, the main one that I saw, besides the ones we mentioned, were at the end when they ride off like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade at the end to the sunset.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and that kind of starts earlier with Jar Jar kind of bumbling around on the EOP.
Yes. Don't touch anything.
Reminded me a lot of Marcus bouncing around awkwardly on his Force.
Yes, and of course,
Last Crusade.
Yes, absolutely. And then the main bad guy at the end of the second part of this that has a whip.
Yeah.
And there's also the chase through the market where
yes,
yeah, I was going to say the chase.
Yelling, you almost hear Marion going, "Indy!"
And then when they get on the little, it looks like they're getting on the mine car too in Temple of Doom as well.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, I felt that was more of like the Last Crusade kind of rocket sled.
Oh yeah. I could say you mean Crystal Skull rocket sled?
Oh yeah, Crystal Skull rocket sled. Yeah, because the way it lights up the desert around it and stuff.
We know Ed was going to try to correct you, so we wanted to get that out there.
Thank you for saving me.
They'll cut that. Don't worry.
So Corey, what about you? What did you see?
No, we cut nothing. No, No, yeah, a lot mentioned a lot of things I kind of had in mind. I mean, you guys obviously saw more than me, but like Chris mentioned earlier too, where Jar Jar's on top of the robots there, it reminded me of the market scene where he's looking for Marion, similar to that. So yeah, it was definitely a lot of fun. I just really like that part of it. To me, was really a nice homage to Indy, and it was just a lot of fun to see them do that.
If we ever have Dave Filoni to have a cup of coffee with us, I'm going to beg him to make an Indiana Jones series.
Oh, that'd be great.
It'll be awesome.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Well,
Indiana Jones the animated series.
Yeah,
we had a couple more for you.
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, well, there was a scene in the market where all the guys with the masks. This is in part 2. They're chasing Jar Jar, I think it was at that point, and I totally was thinking of the beginning of Raiders, where he's running down the hill. Start the plane, Jacques.
Oh, yeah.
The plane, Jacques. That was totally that same shot. Then there was that weird cat-looking woman with the strange cat thing that was. I've never seen it before except in that one Ahsoka episode in season 5. She's like down in the depths.
Yeah, a lot of those monsters, they reminded me a little bit of the Mortis arc too.
Right, but I don't know what that cat thing is. But
I don't either.
That's the only place I've ever seen one. But I totally expected it to be like jumping on the basket to let them know where Marion was. That didn't happen, but I bet you that was pitched at some point. And
Laird, you were going to say something when I mentioned Dave Filoni earlier?
Oh, I was going to say, Rob McGee, when he was on the IndyCast, he did just do our polls, and
yes.
For sure, it was overwhelming from IndyCast fans that would love an Indiana Jones animated, regular series. Not surprising. I think all fans would really enjoy it if they could pull it off, but...
Fans of decent entertainment would love that.
I mean, really just good people would love that.
That's right. That's right. People that have joy to spread in the world. So I want to talk a little bit more about Mace and his treatment of the Bardotans, and as well as his treatment of the enemy. We see a force ability that we haven't seen before. He says, have a nice nap, and he kind of does this force push, and I assume he knocks the guy out. Does he suffocate him temporarily? What does he do? And Is that
the same thing Qui-Gon does to Jar Jar in the submarine in episode 1?
Maybe. It just doesn't seem quite as violent.
I think I actually got the sense that he was actually force pushing him and his head was hitting the stone behind him and that was knocking him out. That may be too literal, but that's the sense I had.
Yeah.
I feel like he closed off his airway temporarily just because it's almost a graceful way to knock somebody out.
Then again, too, it's like we have this Mace Windu, Samuel Jackson feel, so he's a little bit darker or, brutal, if you will, I guess. But yeah, I saw that and I was like, oh, he kind of had to say, have a nice nap. Because if he had said nothing, you would have kind of been like, oh, did he just kill that guy?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, definitely.
That might have been added later to soften it a little.
Yeah. So
he's a violent guy, and you hear little rumors and rumblings about him being more pulled toward the dark side on occasion, which maybe you could argue happens in his confrontation in episode 3 with the Emperor. But I think Mace, again, is someone that is very interesting in his force abilities. He does make sure to calm Jar Jar at the beginning of the Disappeared Part 2. But he's a very interesting character wielding that purple lightsaber. He seems to be the only Jedi in this series, the entire series, that takes joy out of the action, much like Anakin does.
I thought he and Anakin are not too different, really, in that they approach everything kind of at full steam.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of the reason why they have conflict. And and the difference between Jar Jar and Anakin, besides a tremendous amount of force ability, is that Jar Jar, for all of the problems he's gone through, doesn't have the tragedy of being a slave and losing his mother and all those sort of things. And so he doesn't react back the way Anakin does to, ultimately causes Mace's life.
Yes, exactly. And then Mace is also one thing that does separate them. He's obviously older, so sometimes that lends itself to more maturity, but not always. He is able to center himself instead of rushing into action, whereas Anakin may not have taken that avenue.
I also thought too that when they, in the beginning of the episode 1, first part, when they're sitting in the council discussing this discrepancy and what they're going to do about it, he speaks up and says something. Yoda I think it's Obi-Wan that says something like, "Are you volunteering in a sense?" Mm-hmm. He's like, "I guess I am." Type, I guess if it's if we're going to send somebody, I'll go. And I seemed like that was kind of like,
it's like a shortest straw.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. I thought like, well, if you're gonna say something, you might as well just go then, because no one else want to go, and because it's Jar Jar Binks. And I don't know, I thought it was interesting that he was kind of like, I guess I'll go and do that.
Well, I think they also
they weren't
were
exactly
sensitive.
lining up for that.
Yeah, and I think they were sensitive to, from the story point of view. I mean, this was touched upon, and also in the Clone Wars, the idea of kidnapping. And what is what is it when you get a Force-sensitive child and it's got placed into the Jedi Temple or into Sidious's, sort of lab or whatever that was? I don't know. I think it was maybe in season 2. And so Mace, recounts that. I mean, it's like we were considered kidnappers. I'm like, well, you kind of were kidnappers, I think.
Yes.
And so Mace seems to be the one who knows a lot of that history. And so he just seemed appropriate. It didn't. If it had been Plo Koon, for example, it was obviously Dave Filoni's favorite. Mm-hmm. That's not sort of Plo Koon's area. He's more of a tactician and a general, and
more a gentleman, really.
More a gentleman, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was going to bring that up to the notion that the Jedi are labeled as kidnappers. If the people of Bardota feel that way, it's conceivable that there are other people that do too, which again lends itself to how Palpatine is able to shift the pendulum over. Queen Julia says darkness will engulf the galaxy. And Corey, you and I talked about this before. You wondered how much that's connected to Palpatine's plan. How much does he know, and how does he use something like this to help further his plans too? Yeah,
when I first watched this episode or these episodes, and I was trying to figure out what was who was going to be the final enemy and what the whole stakes were. I thought, oh, Mother Talzin is going to be working with Palpatine in some sense, and I thought, well, maybe what if she was doing her own thing and she's got her own plan to take over the galaxy, and he has nothing connected to Palpatine in a sense. And I thought it was just an interesting concept of like maybe there's two people looking to take over everything, and this is just her way of doing it. It didn't work out, but
sure.
I thought it was interesting that she would have her own plans and dealings.
Well, and then if you consider Darth Maul, Son of Dathomir, those comics, which are canonical as well, which I was trying to look up online before we started taping tonight, where those comics fit in season 6 or after season 6. So I wasn't quite sure, but Mother Talzin definitely is not a fan of the Empire, or no, I guess it's not the Empire this time. She's not a fan of the Sith, because she specifically says she wants to be more powerful than both the Jedi and the Sith. So let's talk about Mother Talzin, her power, her abilities, and magic, introducing magic or reintroducing magic into the Star Wars universe.
Magic is only an illusion.
That's right. Which is what Mace says to her. Well, Chris, yeah. What did you make of Mother Talzin and what she does for the Star Wars universe in introducing magic?
It's kind of a neat thing. It adds an element that you normally see more in fantasy, and kind of reminds me that Star Wars has never tried to be hard science fiction. It's always been space fantasy. Mm-hmm. And so I like those little reminders every once in a while. And when you see, like, it's something they fight with all the time, to have an ongoing series where the bad guys never get truly defeated, to keep them threatening is a challenge. But to have somebody really interesting and really creepy that you really don't understand and only shows up every once in a while, like Mother Talzin, then that certainly adds another interesting villain. You're not really sure is she a villain, because there's been some episodes where she's been helpful to characters that you didn't expect to be rooting for.
Right. Although she still has no problem taking a life to yes, to achieve her ends. So she's definitely like a third entity in this whole Jedi Sith thing.
Yeah, I'm certainly not going to argue that she's a good person.
No, absolutely not.
But there's she's certainly a wild card in the whole. Growing up with Star Wars being such a black and white thing, you've got good guys and bad guys. You've got rebels and empire.
Mm-hmm.
The Clone Wars throws in all these wonderful gray areas that didn't exist when we were kids, or at least we didn't think about them.
Yes, and I love that you mentioned the fact that it introduces more fantasy into the world too, because it isn't hard science fiction. Absolutely. In fact, for me, that's one of the things that I find appealing about it. Yeah. And Laird, what about you? What about Mother Talzin?
Well, it's I was going to mention those comics as well because, of course, the first time I saw the episodes, I hadn't read the comics. I think the 3 are out of the 4, and so that added a whole other color to this about her stake.
Yes.
And so I've sort of I've been mixed on her. The first time I'd heard of Dathomir, I think, was in the Fate of the Jedi series, although it had been earlier, but I had missed the EU that had referred to Dathomir, so I had to go look it up. But I love her relationship with Maul. Now even more so from the comics. And here, for me, I thought one of the interesting connections was that she goes in and out of transparency, and the voice is modified to have multiple dubs on top of it and flanging, which is very cool. And her color is kind of green. That's kind of a dominant color in her art style. And the force that they pull out is green as well. And so even though she's magic and she's sort of not a force wielder, she's got a visual connection to what they're showing us as the force essence. So I kind of wondered if Mace was right in some ways, and like, what is it just an illusion? She seems pretty powerful for an illusion. And she disappears at the end, which also does beg that question, which is when does that Dathomir comic story happen? Because, she's very corporal in that. Of course, we've seen her disappear a number of times, actually.
Yeah, that's her move.
Yeah, that's her move. So I actually thought
that's her finishing move.
You may say she's not a force wielder, but I kind of, she's got a lot of powers that are similar to the force.
Yeah, and that green mystical energy that surrounds her. What you mentioned about her sort of fading in and out, her corporal image. It does say on StarWars.com that the exact wording is Mother Talzin's story is not over yet. So I had heard some people debating whether she had died in that series, but obviously, based on that, the comic and StarWars.com, she hasn't. Corey, what were you going to say about Mother Talzin?
Yeah, I was going to say, like you said, she's got this green aura. She makes a green like sword and dual mace, and I thought it was interesting that that she could do that and use that. It reminded me too of like this is maybe a long, far-fetched connection, but Superman always kind of has his kryptonite as their go-to. Bad stuff for Superman, but also he's affected by magic, which made me think of that too. I thought, well, that's interesting that, it's almost this, like Chris said, it's this gray area, this we're not really totally sure about, and even Mace was not too sure about, and there's almost this mystic about it, and they're not too sure how strong it is. It's almost like this thing that could be used, but we're not, maybe it's not too powerful, but then maybe again, with this episode, conjuring, using the Force and stealing the Force, and obviously has some Force connection to it. Is there a whole different component to the Force that we're missing completely or we haven't seen a whole lot of? And it's pretty interesting. It's a lot of fun.
Well, I kind of took it as someone who would be polytheist versus a monotheist, and the idea of when you use magic, you're taking it from like the earth and the green, the mist surrounds it could be symbolic of the earth or nature and things like that. It seems to come from within her, which would certainly be a non-Christian way of looking at it. And I think you could easily make a strong argument for a lot of religions for the Jedi or the Sith. But if you took the Jedi as Christian and the Sith as fallen, then you could take Mother Talzin and her magic as paganism, which backs up the color of green in nature. There's a little bit of Beowulf in here as well. And then she pulls out that mystical sword, which Beowulf has a mystical sword forged by giants. And in hers, who knows where her sword comes from, but we've seen this sword very briefly. We see the dark saber through Pre Vizsla. And then, of course, we have the lightsaber. So I was fascinated by that weapon.
And that move was awesome. I mean, it really was a great graphical move. It had the sort of bravado that a good sword fight starts with. You never start with just starting this, you never just hit the swords, right? Mm-hmm. You gotta pull it out of the sheath or ignite the lightsaber in a way, or Darth Maul when he, when in the Phantom Menace when he lights the second blade. Like that's a sword fight, and that was a very fulfilling sword fight, and nicely intercut. I mean, I think one of the things that was about this episode that was very Star Wars-like is that because Mace and Jar Jar get separated at different times, either because Mace is isolated or because Jar Jar's taken, and then there's the battle has its different arenas at the end, there's a lot of cutting between the two. And that montage sequencing, really allowed the action to like build, and then you cut somewhere else and have some more action. And I just felt that worked very well and punctuated by, like all good Star Wars movies have sword fights.
Yes, absolutely. Always at the end, dramatic. We saw a little bit of that with some of the trailers for Rebels that came out over at Comic-Con too. So we've almost been talking for an hour about these 2 episodes, which is interesting. And what are some of your final thoughts, guys? Overall, I know at the beginning, I would say it was probably safe to say that you were all lukewarm. You enjoyed it, but it wasn't something you would rank highly. After our discussion, any other final thoughts jump up, change the way you look at these 2 series? Laird, why don't we start with you?
Well, I'd say that for me, the lukewarm feeling was around kind of a general story construction and pacing.
Sure.
As I said, I found the first third of the 2 stories, the first half of the first one, I guess first quarter, it's just very dry. There's a lot of narrative they have to get out, a lot of exposition to get to us to understand what the heck's going on. We're introducing so many new characters. And so for me, it's just from a rewatchability point of view, it's sort of not that much. It was, I don't feel like I'm going to run back to these episodes for the whole sequence. Mm-hmm. But actually, I hadn't really thought about some of the deeper issues around the Force and whatnot. So our conversation has been very enlightening that way. And it gives me appreciation. There's more depth there than I thought. I was sort of focusing on, and maybe comparing it to like Yoda's tremendous journey.
Yes.
And growth that comes with that. And here, just a little bit of growth. But I still think that the back half is fantastic. I mean, the last 10 minutes, which is all the way from the city, maybe that's even 15 minutes from the city through the end, and has a very satisfying ending. So, where does that lead me? That leads me overall as a 2-parter. Like, okay, enjoyed it, and with elements of like I really, really like these pieces of it.
Corey, what about you? What are some of your final thoughts? I know you had some things that you'd put in our show notes here that we didn't get a chance to get to. What are your final thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, like Laird said, it's not totally rewatchable, but through our discussion and all the little indie stuff, I actually didn't see a lot of that stuff. I was like, I'm gonna have to go back and watch that now just because I want to see it. Definitely, it's a lot of fun, and I mean, like you said, it's fun to go back and like kind of rethink about that second half as far as using the magic and just different aspects of some of the discussions we've had here. One thing that I'd seen, just from a designer's standpoint, I kind of noticed that the Queen Julia's outfit seemed similar to Slave Leia's costume. Just I don't know if that was just my just looking at the animation to this series has been really, really well done. I just feel like they've really kind of brought their A game just to finish out season 6 here, and I really enjoyed. Just the mood and the settings and the underground caverns they had done, things like that. It was just really well done, and using the magic and the green and stuff was really cool. But yeah, just through our discussion it's showed me a lot more to this. Maybe there is to go back and check it out one more time and make some more notes or just enjoy it. And again too, it's a lot of fun for my kids to watch it. They liked it a lot because of Jar Jar. And of course, it's exciting. It was a lot of fun, the indie stuff, and the chase scenes. A lot of chase scenes, a lot of action in this. Seems like to me, but definitely, I'll probably go back and check it out here pretty soon.
And Corey, real quick, I want to ask you to follow up. Were your kids creeped out by some of this? Because when everyone is kidnapped and they disappear, was that creepy for them? I could see where that could be a little scary. Yeah,
I mean, I think they meant disappeared. I don't know if that was more of like a scary thing, or like, oh, they'll come back eventually. I mean,
they blow that dust on it.
Yeah, it seems like they kind of give us that explanation there, and I thought it was kind of interesting too. They're carrying around Jar Jar, who's invisible, and that's almost
they can still see they kick him though.
Yeah, the humor personified there. It's like we want Jar Jar, but we don't want to see Jar Jar type thing. And
oh, nice.
So that was interesting. Yeah. But the kids weren't too afraid because I think Jar Jar brings that light and that humor. To every scene he's in, he's kicking or he's goofing, his eyeballs are going crazy, or he's making funny noises and stuff, and so I think it really toned that down for the kids, and they enjoyed it a lot.
And Chris, what were some of your final thoughts overall on this arc?
I've spent probably more energy than I'd rather say over the last 14 years uncomfortably defending Jar Jar. That's an awkward position to be in, but this one, I overall, I enjoyed it. It's certainly, I would, as far as Jar Jar episodes, I would rank it quite high and put it almost as much as I enjoyed his meeting of General Grievous. I thought that was pretty cool too. But Yeah, I think out of this conversation, I'd say there's probably more to it than I saw. What I saw was a lot of Indiana Jones references that some of them worked really well, and some of them felt like they were trying too hard to make the reference work as opposed to tell a coherent story. Like a little more explanation as to how Jar Jar knows this woman and like really knows her, and that they're kissing and doing Tai Chi together.
Yes, yes.
that could have been explained a little bit better. More of the kissing, I guess, than the Tai Chi. But I enjoyed these for sure, and they're definitely a lot of fun. What I got out of it is Jar Jar is a lot. He can be more cleverly funny when written well, like when Mace Windu is trying to meditate to see what's going on in the market, and he says, "I see the market, I see people," and he goes, "Yes, Mace, I see that too." Jar Jar's delivery was bang on, and he wasn't annoying in any way. He was speaking for the audience there. The audience was with Jar Jar, impatiently wanting to go rescue Julia, not sit there meditating with Mace Windu. And that's not easy to do, to get people to be rooting with Jar Jar. But he's also more violent than I ever saw before. Jar Jar clotheslines the guy in the fight at the end. He knocks a guy down. We've never seen Jar Jar really fight before, so that was kind of interesting.
Well, there's where the Tai Chi comes in, I guess.
Yeah, just speed it up.
Yeah, honestly, yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that. When they're doing that Tai Chi, there's a lot of spirituality in this. Yeah. Through the meditation, through the Tai Chi. Through the romance. And I did actually do some research. It turns out that Queen Julia and Jar Jar met at the Enchantment Under the Sea dance. Yeah, so that worked out well.
So actually, you touched upon something. You both touched upon something there. All three of you did. Not the Enchantment Under the Sea dance, but the about Julia, because we didn't talk too much about her character, and I did want to point out a couple things. You said, I think Corey, you said that you remind you of the Slave Leia costume, and for me, it was a little bit more of the Willie Scott outfit that she wears after she gets the Pankot. But even more so, I think she's a very strong leader. She's passionate about protecting her people. She's respected. She wants to talk to Jar Jar, and not have the guards watch. So she waves her hand and they turned around. And, so she saves Jar Jar, which I think works for us because if Jar Jar's too much of the hero, we're not going to buy it. It's sort of he tries to be the hero. You see this in lots of Clone Wars episodes. He's good-hearted, he's good-natured, but he gets in his own way. And there's no problem with he helps her out of the trap before he does her part of saving her, and then she saves him from the beam. And we don't often see besides Leia and Padme like other strong female characters in the series. On Ahsoka, like how can I forget Ahsoka? But it's but I was thinking more to the movies, right? Sure. It's just the two, and there was all the flap about episode 7 before they announced all the rest of the female casting. That and I think Julia is actually she has no embarrassment about being attracted to Jar Jar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she plants one on him right away. How does it impact her characterization when she's constantly in pretty much the second episode before she rescues Jar Jar? She pretty much all she's doing is swooning. You know what I mean? And she's always like under some sort of duress, which obviously that would be stressful to anyone, regardless of their gender. But she is an interesting character, and I like that she does some heroic things while dressed in practically a slave type costume.
There's a lot to analyze there because the episode does go out of its way to remind us that Jar Jar is very childlike, and Mace Windu sees him as very childlike, and Julia is quite attracted to him. So there's definitely a lot of psychoanalysis that could be going on with her.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons I enjoyed this arc so much, I certainly didn't enjoy it, as I said at the top of the show, as much as the others in season 6. It's not one that if I was trying to persuade someone that the Clone Wars was a great show that expands upon Star Wars and will add to your enjoyment of the saga, this isn't one I would throw out there. It would have to be someone who really liked Mace or Jar Jar or was just trying to get through everything. But I do think the way that they treat the nature of the Force what we see about Mace's character, the idea of magics and how that impacts the Force are all things that I enjoyed. And as I also mentioned, I absolutely love seeing Mace Windu in action, and the animation and the choreography of the fighting is par excellence here. Absolutely outstanding.
Well, that's the thing with Clone Wars. It got to a point where you kind of take it for granted. The animation is going to be amazing. The voice acting is going to be amazing. And it really is just discussing the storytelling.
Yes, very much so. Well, guys, thank you so much for being a part of a Cup of Clone Wars with us. And of course,
thank you.
Absolutely, it was our pleasure. We're so happy that we could get this all to work, and it was a very challenging task to sync all of our schedules because we're all very busy. But Laird and Chris are unbelievable guys and very flexible and patient. So we thank you both so much. It was certainly worth it to have you guys on. We can't wait to have you on again. And of course, now that we're at the end of our show, we have to ask you both your 5 questions.
Sure.
All right,
Laird, why don't we'll ask you your 5 and then we'll move on to Chris.
Sure.
All right. Laird, what is your favorite Star Wars movie?
My favorite Star Wars movie is A New Hope. And I have a really soft spot. Not a soft spot. I really enjoy episode 1 as well. So, but anyways, New Hope.
Okay, favorite Star Wars character.
This is tougher for me because I really like Qui-Gon, and I would pay to see an entire trilogy with Qui-Gon.
Oh, me too.
Or a whole series. But it's hard to like him over, say, one of the characters who's in more movies like Obi-Wan or Han. But I really like Qui-Gon, so I'm going to say Qui-Gon Jinn.
Well, hey, nothing wrong with that. He's awesome. What is your favorite line of dialogue or film moment?
I have a bad feeling about this. I think I'm
classic line.
Yeah, it's just a classic line. I say a lot of the lines all the time. Like X-wing fighter, approaching. I just say that.
That comes up in conversation all the time.
It does, exactly.
Right.
So I use a lot of them of the known ones, and some of the really So for example, whenever I see my sister, I say that. So anyway, but yeah, I got a bad feeling about this, and everybody says it.
Which is also, of course, in Crystal Skull.
Yep.
Okay, favorite line of dialogue. Or I'm sorry, it's if you collect, what's your favorite collectible you own?
I do collect sort of a random amount of stuff. So I have a lot of interesting things. I think my favorite collectible, and I'll tell you the story that goes with it. When I was 15, which would be in the summer of '82. A lot of excitement was building for the third movie, and I was just a very low-paid counselor in training at the local park, and so I didn't have a lot of money. And so when they released the Revenge of the Jedi poster that summer and sold it in a film shop near where I lived, I think I must have gone 3 or 4 weekends in a row and just stared at it like, I really want to get that. But it's $25. And I ultimately did shell out the $25. And, of course, not knowing at all that the film title would be Return of the Jedi. And so it sits framed in my office. I don't consider my office until my Revenge of the Jedi poster is hanging in it. So it's nicely framed. And so that's my favorite collectible. I'm glad
cool.
I'm glad I dropped that $25.
Heck yeah! I don't know if you extrapolate that, how much it would be worth in today's dollar.
That's a good investment.
Yeah,
anyway.
I don't know. It's I think it's worth about $1,000 now because it's in pretty good condition.
That's awesome.
I'd never sell
I think
it.
you've made your $25 back.
Yeah,
I think so.
Well, I got the $25 back in pleasure.
Oh, absolutely. So, what particular messages or themes about the Star Wars saga resonate or speak to you?
That's the toughest one of all the 5, which is I think why you have it last.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a well developed interview technique. But
thank you.
Question at the end. I think for me that there's. I'm not sure if people consider this a Star Wars theme per se, but for me that there's just always a way. There's always possibilities. There's no sort of complete down and out. Something can always be changed, and which is sort of counters, sort of the idea of seeing the future, but it is in motion. But the sense that, even at the bleakest, that there's, with effort and passion and belief, that you can change the situation. So I don't know if that people consider that a Star Wars theme or not. That's more of a universal theme, but I see that happen in all the movies. So, and that's, I think that's why I come back to it.
Well, certainly a good answer. And Chris, of course, we're going to ask you 5 questions as well. Now, no stealing from Laird's answers, so you have to come up with your own.
Actually, I have pretty different answers.
Oh, awesome. So, favorite Star Wars movie?
The one I put on most often is probably Return of the Jedi. So that's my way of not stealing his answer. I don't really go with The New Hope as favorite, but I probably put on more often Return of the Jedi.
Very good. Well, who is your favorite character?
I was hoping to be the first Coffee with Kenobi guest to say this character, and then I listened to John Morton, Dak, and I think he said Chewbacca. And as much as I love the themes and the motifs and everything that goes on with the mysticism of the Force and everything, I just love Chewbacca. the Luke Skywalker Anakin story is wonderful and it's all there, but if I saw Chewbacca, that would just I'd be nervous just seeing somebody in a really good quality Chewbacca costume. I'd be starstruck.
Oh yeah, how much did you love seeing him in the Clone Wars?
That was so fantastic.
It was
just knowing there were going to be some Wookiees showing up in Episode 3 was pretty amazing.
Yeah, Chewbacca seems to always be like that ultimate buddy that people pick. Him and Samwise Gamgee, so they're kind of squared off. Hey, I do what I can.
And I know you guys like themes, so there's a theme to my answers. You'll see it in a second.
Sure. Oh, sweet.
So, favorite line of dialogue or film moment?
Okay, forget what I just said. The theme will come back later. I got 2 favorite lines of dialogue. You'll find the many truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view. Is absolutely true. People have their own lens on how they view the world. Obi-Wan had his kind of bizarre concept of truth and what it means to be honest and forthright, but or at least the distinction between honesty and forthright. But yeah, I think that's something to really consider whenever you're talking to somebody else with a different opinion, that their point of view is going to greatly filter what they see as the truth.
And you said you had another one too?
I do. Based on everything I do, the Yoda saying "truly wonderful the mind of a child is absolutely true, and I try to include it in every episode of the podcast. Certainly, whenever I answer a question from a kid, I like to put that quote in there.
Well, one of the things I love so much about Star Wars Kidscast is how you are very much in tune with listeners of all ages, and you make it entertaining for all of them. So kudos to you. Absolutely. My pleasure. Well, if you collect, Chris, what is your favorite collectible that you own?
I do collect. I collect way too many things.
I understand.
So this is where we're going back to the theme. There's 2 collectibles that are my most cherished. One is the Chewbacca that my parents got me. My first exposure to Star Wars was 3 action figures. It was a Luke, an R2-D2, and a Chewbacca. And Chewbacca is the only one that survived. I was not aware of the movies. I was 4 years old. Somehow hadn't heard about them yet. Didn't know what these characters do or how they relate to each other. My brother and I, we thought Chewbacca might bark. We didn't know. We thought he was kind of a dog, but he was awesome. And we later pieced together the story. And I vividly remember seeing Empire Strikes Back, but I don't remember anything other than that. So that Chewbacca is the only one that survived childhood. He's incredibly wiggly, can't stand up now, but he's pretty cherished. And the other one is a very cool Japanese Boba Fett that my partner Bev got for me when she was in Japan. That's pretty special.
That's awesome. Very rare.
Yeah, maybe they're incredibly commonplace in Japan. I don't know, but I haven't seen one here. He's kind of cartoony looking and squished. Like his helmet is half his whole size, and his body's the same size as his helmet. It's very cartoonish. He's got his blaster drawn, and he has a few sounds. It's pretty awesome.
That's pretty awesome. Okay, final question. What particular messages or themes about the Star Wars saga resonate or speak to you?
I think the biggest one is that appearances can be deceiving. Don't be quick to judge what somebody else's capabilities are or what they can do. You see that throughout the whole saga. You see Han sort of dismissive of Luke. Well, look what Luke turned into. And you see people dismissive of Anakin as a child. It's just an ongoing theme of don't be too quick to judge others of what their capabilities are. And to tie it back to our conversation tonight, Jar Jar is a classic example of somebody who's everybody was very quick to judge, and here we are all these years later still talking about this character, and he's still interesting. We may not love him yet, but he's an interesting character, and he's worth talking about, and he certainly has a significance to the story. Again, causing the downfall of the galaxy, but everybody has a redeeming quality, and maybe someday Jar Jar will be able to redeem himself completely.
That's right. I wonder if we'll ever find out what Jar Jar's fate was in the galaxy. And who knows what will happen when we go into theaters in December of 2015. And gentlemen, again, thank you so much, both of you, for being on a Cup of Clone Wars, the Coffee with Kenobi. We had a great time having you on.
Thank you.
Loved your insights. Really, really appreciate you taking time to join us.
Well, thanks so much for having me on. It's a pleasure listening to you guys since the very beginning of the show, and which I think is awesome. And now to be part of it is super special. And just hope to have a chance to do it again and talk more Star Wars and more Indy.
Oh, you bet, man. We would be honored to have you both on in the future. So thank you both very much, and have a wonderful evening.
Chewie, get us out of here!
If you would like to respond to our question of the show, have a comment, or just want to say hello, send us an email or MP3 at feedback@coffeewithkenobi.com. Or if you have a specific question or comment for either of us individually, email us at danz@coffeewithkenobi.com or coryc@coffeewithkenobi.com, or visit us at coffeewithkenobi.com and click on the Contact Us section, or comment on one of the stories featured on the site. If you enjoy the show, please write a review in iTunes. You can also like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/coffeewithkenobi, as well as keep up to date on our Twitter feed at twitter.com/coffeewithkenobi. You can also find us on Tumblr at coffeewithkenobi.tumblr.com. If you enjoy the jazz music, download the album Eye to Eye by Steve Torok on iTunes.
Give the evacuation code signal.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here. Move along. Move along.